10%, then 25%. That is the number Donald Trump put on the table, not against rivals, not against adversaries, but against 8 allied nations as leverage to force the sale of Greenland. What followed was not strength, it was a deadly policy error, because this was never about tariffs. It was about coercion. And coercion, when aimed at allies, does not project power, it destroys it. At a high-stakes international press conference, Mark Carney did something Washington did not expect. He did not negotiate. He did not hedge. He publicly labeled the threat an escalation, reaffirmed that Greenland belongs to its people and to Denmark, and then delivered a message that landed like a hammer across the Arctic. Canada would not bend. Canada would mobilize, and Canada would do it through NATO. Here is the contradiction that should make every American stop cold. While Donald Trump was threatening allies with economic punishment, Canada was quietly consolidating power, tightening its alignment with Nordic partners, reinforcing the northern flank of NATO, and transforming Greenland into a strategic zone the United States could no longer dominate unilaterally. This was not resistance for show, this was preparation. And then came the line that stunned diplomats in the room. When pressed directly, Carney said, "I will say everything I just said to Trump in Davos. No threats, no bluster, just resolve." So the real question is not why Canada pushed back. The real question is this: why did the United States force its allies to unite against it, just to lose control of the Arctic? To understand why this confrontation matters, you have to strip away the headlines and look at the infrastructure of power beneath them. Greenland is not a symbol, it is a systemic asset. Beneath its ice lie vast reserves of rare earth elements, materials essential to batteries, wind turbines, electric vehicles, advanced semiconductors, missile guidance systems, and next-generation radar. These are not optional inputs. They are foundational to modern industrial economies and military readiness. Right now, the United States depends on foreign supply chains for more than 90% of its processed rare earth materials. A significant portion of that processing is controlled directly or indirectly by China. That dependency is not theoretical, it is measurable. It affects marginal cost curves, defense procurement timelines, and the resilience of just-in-time supply chains that American manufacturers still rely on. Greenland represented a potential release valve. Access to Greenland's mineral base through cooperation with Denmark and Nordic partners could have diversified Western supply, reduced exposure to geopolitical choke points, and stabilized input costs across energy, defense, and advanced manufacturing sectors. Instead of shared investment and long-term offtake agreements, Washington chose coercion. And that is where the economics turn brutal. Tariffs of 10% rising to 25% do not pressure governments, they raise costs across integrated supply chains. European partners threatened by these tariffs are not peripheral trading nodes. They sit at the center of logistics, refining, shipping, and capital deployment for Arctic projects. Punishing them does not isolate Greenland. It isolates the United States. Canada understood this immediately. By reinforcing its alignment with Denmark, Norway, Finland, and Iceland, and by coordinating directly with NATO leadership, Canada reframed Greenland from an economic bargaining chip into a collective security zone. Once that happened, unilateral access was no longer just politically costly. It became structurally impossible. This is the logic Washington ignored. Modern resource power is not about ownership. It is about trust, infrastructure, and alliances. Mining projects take decades. Ports, rail links, and undersea data and energy cables require shared financing, shared security guarantees, and predictable partners. The moment allies are treated as targets, capital freezes. Risk premiums spike, and alternatives emerge. That is the economic reality Trump miscalculated. Greenland was never something to be taken. It was something to be earned. And the United States chose the one strategy guaranteed to lose it. This is where the strategy collapses, not in diplomatic halls, but in American homes, factories, and balance sheets. Trump's tariff threat was framed as leverage. In reality, it functioned as a self-inflicted tax on the United States economy. Start with energy and manufacturing. Rare earth elements are embedded in everything from grid-scale batteries to precision tooling. When access uncertainty rises, suppliers hedge. Contracts shorten, prices move first, production follows later. Within weeks of the tariff threat, American importers began repricing risk, not because materials disappeared, but because trust did. Industry groups quietly sounded alarms. Representatives from advanced manufacturing associations warned that even a 10% tariff shock, let alone 25%, would cascade through cost structures already strained by labor shortages and elevated financing costs. One executive described the situation bluntly: "You cannot run a just-in-time system on geopolitical tantrums." Then come the states. In New York, clean energy developers rely on European and Nordic supply chains for offshore wind components and battery systems. Tariff escalation does not punish foreign governments. It stalls projects, delays grid upgrades, and raises electricity prices for consumers. In Michigan and Ohio, electric vehicle manufacturers face higher input volatility precisely as they are racing to scale. Margins compress, investment decisions slow, real jobs get deferred. In Maine and Massachusetts, ports tied into transatlantic logistics feel the squeeze immediately. Shipping contracts reroute, insurance premiums rise, small operators absorb shocks they did not create. And then there is Florida, where few expect consequences, but where port traffic, construction materials, and energy storage imports quietly intersect with the same European supply networks now under threat. Tariffs ripple far beyond their intended targets. This is the backfire effect. When a policy aimed outward detonates inward, even American defense planners are not immune. Arctic security depends on interoperability with allies' shared surveillance, shared logistics, shared basing. By threatening those allies economically, Washington undermines the very cooperation its own military requires. One retired defense official summarized the risk: "You don't strong-arm the people guarding your flank." Meanwhile, Canada did nothing dramatic. No counter-tariffs, no press theatrics. It simply locked in alternatives with Nordic partners, with European capital, and through NATO's Northern Security Framework. The result is brutal in its simplicity. American businesses absorb higher costs. American states face delays and uncertainty. American influence shrinks. And the allies? They adapt together. This is not strength. This is backfire at scale. While Washington escalated publicly, Canada moved quietly, methodically, and irreversibly. This is the part most American commentators missed. Canada did not respond with tariffs or speeches. It responded with infrastructure, alliances, and lock-in. First came the diplomatic architecture. Ottawa deepened coordination with Denmark and the Nordic bloc, not as a symbolic gesture, but as a long-term strategic alignment. Greenland was reframed not as a commercial target, but as a shared responsibility within the northern security and economic ecosystem of NATO. Once that framing took hold, unilateral access by the United States was effectively neutralized. Then came the logistics. Canada accelerated investment discussions around Arctic-capable ports, northern rail extensions, and ice-class shipping corridors linking Greenland, Northern Europe, and North America without routing through United States-controlled choke points. These are not speculative ideas. They are feasibility studies, financing frameworks, and defense-aligned infrastructure plans designed to last decades. At the same time, Canada widened its economic aperture. Coordination intensified with European Union partners on critical minerals processing and downstream manufacturing. The logic was simple: mine together, refine together, secure together. The more value added outside the United States, the less leverage Washington retains. Mexico also enters the picture not as a headline actor, but as a strategic hinge. By reinforcing North-South supply resilience with Mexico, Canada reduces dependence on east-west routes dominated by U.S. policy risk. Manufacturing diversification is not about abandoning North America. It is about redundancy without vulnerability. Most importantly, Canada repositioned itself as the guarantor of stability. By working directly with NATO leadership to strengthen the Arctic security umbrella, particularly on the western and northern flanks, Canada transformed Greenland into a zone where coercion is not just unwelcome, but structurally blocked. Security guarantees attract capital. Capital builds infrastructure. Infrastructure locks in partnerships. This is the counter-strategy Trump never accounted for. Because once allies stop seeing the United States as predictable, they stop needing it as a gatekeeper. Canada does not need American permission to cooperate with Europe. It does not need American approval to secure the Arctic. And it does not need American threats to understand leverage. The brutal truth is this: Canada is no longer hedging against the United States. It is designing around it. And that design is already underway. What just changed is not a trade dispute. It is the structure of trust inside the Western alliance, and once that breaks, it does not regenerate on command. For decades, the United States exercised influence not because it threatened allies, but because it anchored predictability. Capital flowed where rules were stable, security aligned where commitments were credible. The Arctic, long treated as a peripheral theater, functioned under that assumption. Trump shattered it. By openly threatening allied economies to force a territorial outcome, Washington signaled that alliance status no longer guarantees safety from coercion. That message landed not just in Europe, but across every capital that depends on U.S. partnership. Here is the irreversibility problem. Even if Trump exits the stage tomorrow, the memory remains. Governments do not unlearn risk. Defense planners do not erase scenarios. Investors do not forget who weaponized tariffs against friends. The damage persists because it reshapes decision-making years into the future. Canada understands this dynamic better than most. By stepping forward as a defender of sovereignty, explicitly grounding Greenland's status in international law and collective security, Canada positioned itself as the anti-coercion anchor within NATO's northern flank. That is not symbolic leadership. It is functional leadership. And that vacuum does not stay empty. China benefits immediately. Every fracture inside the Western alliance reduces resistance to its control over rare earth processing, Arctic shipping ambitions, and global infrastructure financing. China does not need to seize Greenland. It only needs the United States locked out of cooperative access. Russia benefits strategically. A divided NATO is a distracted NATO. When alliance energy is spent managing internal distrust, deterrence weakens by default, especially in the Arctic, where Russia has spent years militarizing quietly and patiently. This is the deeper consequence Washington failed to calculate. Power today is not measured by how loudly a country threatens. It is measured by how many others trust it to lead without force. By pushing allies toward collective resistance, the United States accelerated a world where it is consulted less, trusted less, and bypassed more often. Not because it is weak, but because it is unpredictable. Canada, meanwhile, gains something far more valuable than leverage. It gains credibility. And credibility, once transferred, rarely comes back. Power does not vanish in a single decision. It erodes through misjudgment, through coercion misused, and through the quiet moment when allies decide they no longer feel safe standing beside you. That moment has arrived. The Arctic did not become unreachable to the United States because Canada or Europe conspired against it. It became unreachable because trust was treated as expendable, because partnership was confused with submission. Canada understood the difference. It chose cooperation over intimidation, structure over spectacle, and credibility over chaos. In doing so, it did not challenge the United States directly. It simply made it IR relevant to the future it is now building. This is the lesson history repeats relentlessly. Empires do not fall when they lose wars. They weaken when they force friends to prepare for their instability. So here is the question that will define the next decade. If the United States can no longer lead without threats, and its allies no longer trust those threats, who exactly is still following? Leave your answer in the comments.